Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Principles of Creating Clarity. My name is Hayley. For those of you who do not know me, I am the head of education at ProWritingAid, which is pretty much the best job in the world, not to brag. I've seen a couple of you asking about the copyright session. Unfortunately, our presenter, Bob, had an emergency in his family, so he is not able to be with us this week. So I will be here instead for this session time. That being said, again, my name is Hayley. I'm the head of education at ProWritingAid. It's the best job in the world. I get to think about words really deeply every day, and I also get to talk about clarity. And I know you guys have had so many amazing sessions so far about plotting. You've heard from authors, you've talked about outlining, and this session is going to be a little bit different. We're going to focus on a different part of the writing process, which I hope will be very, very helpful for everyone. So today in this session, we're going to zoom in from focusing on plots and outlines and what story points we should have in character, and really focus in on the specifics of our words. So we are going to be talking about how to set up our sentences so that they read as professional and enjoyable for our readers. So the 3 things that we're going to do in this session are: first, learn why I think clarity is the most important goal for romance writers. Second, we're going to talk about 5 key principles that will make your writing more clear. And then finally, we're going to learn how to apply those principles to your writing to make it more effective. Now, when we get into that third bullet point, how to apply these principles, I'm going to be showing you how to apply these principles using the ProWritingAid tool. But that being said, if you don't have ProWritingAid, do not worry. I'm also going to be teaching you how to apply these principles if you don't have ProWritingAid as well. So regardless of whether or not you have ProWritingAid, you will be learning how to make your writing more clear and effective. And with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So like I mentioned on the first slide, I believe that clarity is an essential part of storytelling for all types of writers. This is because if your writing isn't clear, your work won't engage readers. And I often feel like as writers, we spend so much time thinking about our characters. We spend so much time thinking about our plot. We spend, plotting the best happily ever after, that when it comes to actually getting the words onto the screen or the page or something like that, we often spend less time thinking about, what's the sequence of those words in our sentences actually going to be? Are our sentences going to be set up in a way that does justice to those amazing characters, those amazing settings, those amazing scenarios that we've set up? And this is a shame because, again, we've spent so much time thinking about those characters, those settings, etc., that it's really, really important that we focus on setting up our sentences effectively too. As writers, our main job is to get our meaning across clearly and effectively. If our writing is too complicated, if it's unprofessional, if it's hard to follow, then we're not doing our jobs as writers, even if we have the best romantic lead in the world. You could have created the best romantic lead anyone's ever seen. But again, if your sentences are not set up in a way that is effective for your readers, no one's going to know. When our writing is unclear, our readers are going to spend more time trying to figure out what we're saying than actually engaging with our ideas. They'll have no idea that our, love interest is so great. They'll have no idea that our romantic lead, our protagonist is, such a strong and independent person. They're going to be sitting there thinking like, these sentences are confusing. These sentences are not very engaging. So we really need to make sure that we are prioritizing good writing in terms of our sentence structure and word choice. Good writing is writing that prioritizes clearly communicating ideas over showing off fancy, confusing language. Ideas are the stars here, and we need to make sure that we are setting up our sentences in a way to make those ideas truly be the stars. So before we get into our principles, let's talk about what I mean when I'm saying clarity, because the whole theme of this presentation is being clear. So when I'm talking about clarity, I'm talking about 3 things. The first thing I'm talking about is how easy your writing is to understand. At its basis, clarity is that. Can your readers open your book and understand what you're trying to say? Now, how easy your writing is to understand ties into our second point, which is whether or not your sentences are set up in a reader-focused way. And I really want all of us to hone in on that second half of that sentence, reader-focused. every single one of the 500 or so of us on this webinar all have different readers, right? We all have different readers. We're all writing different books. So what each of our readers want is going to be a little bit different, right? We might be in different subgenres. Some of us might be romance writers. Some of us might be fantasy writers with romance subplots. Regardless of what we're doing, it's important to remember that that we need to set our sentences up in a reader-focused way. So what's clear for one set of readers is going to be different than what's clear for another. The same thing goes if you are writing in your professional life and, personally and creatively. So if you are, for instance, writing a report for your business world, what's clear for the business readers in your business world is going to be very different than what's clear for the romance writers that you're targeting as you're self-publishing, right? Different groups of readers with different sets of understanding. So clarity is going to be different for each of them depending on who they are and what the purpose is of writing. So when you're thinking about how easy your writing is to understand, you need to always bring it back to who your specific readers are, who they are, what backgrounds they have, and what they'll be able to understand. The third thing you need to think about is that clarity means adding rich and specific language that adds to your audience's understanding. A lot of times when I talk about clarity, when I talk about editing, which we'll get into in a second, people get really, really nervous and they are very, very worried that being clear means that they're going to make their sentences too simple. Their sentences will be too rote. They'll sound exactly like everyone else's. And that cannot be further from the case. If you are being clear, you are also using rich and specific language, and we'll talk a lot about that towards the end of the presentation. But it's important to remember, again, that clarity is not just about cutting, or making everything sound the same. Clarity is about thinking about who your readers are and then setting up your sentences with rich and specific language to be effective for them. So as we've just said, clarity has absolutely nothing to do with how simple or juvenile the ideas in your writing are. You can have incredibly complex and difficult ideas while still being clear, okay? And I would actually even argue that it's more important to be clear when you have really complex adult ideas because you don't want your audience to misunderstand them. So if you're trying to communicate something extremely complicated or extremely difficult or sensitive or anything like that, it's really important to come back to clarity to make sure that you're getting your ideas across effectively. And clarity also has nothing to do with whether or not your prose is engaging, unique, or exciting. You can have rich, specific, engaging, exciting prose while still being clear, and we are going to show you how to do it. So where do we begin with clarity? When we think about clarity, we need to think about clarity as starting at the sentence level. So this presentation is going to be zooming way in to look at each sentence individually because clarity starts at the sentence level. That's because sentences are like mini movies. A sentence is almost a complete story in itself. You can think of each sentence as a mini movie that your reader is playing in their head. So if I say, for instance, Hayley puts on red lipstick, you guys can all picture me putting on this red lipstick that I was putting on right before that presentation, right? That sentence in itself is a complete story. You can picture it yourself. That's the same thing for every single sentence in our books. Every sentence in our book is its own mini movie, and we need to focus sentence by sentence in order to make sure that our whole book makes sense. When we have clear sentences, we will have clear paragraphs. When we have clear paragraphs, we'll have clear chapters. When we have clear chapters, we'll have clear stories. We cannot have a clear story if we have unclear sentences. So when we focus in on clarity, we need to zoom all the way down to this level to make sure our sentences are as effective as possible. So with that in mind, how do we write clear sentences? So here are my 5 principles of creating clarity in your writing. I'm going to give you an overview now, and then we will go into each one by one. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to be teaching you about these principles and then how to edit for them and fix them in your writing using ProWritingAid. But that being said, I will also teach you how to do it if you don't have ProWritingAid too. So either way, it will be valuable. So our 5 principles are: first, to make your subjects the stars of your sentences. Second, to reduce glue words, which is one of my favorites. Third is to use powerful verbs. Fourth is to target correct readability. And the fifth is to choose specific words. Let's go ahead and get into sentence number 1. So our first principle is to make our subjects the stars of our sentences. Subjects are the stars of your sentences, and it's important to treat them that way. They are the main actors of your text, so you have to prioritize them. If you've written a sentence with passive voice, that means you've put the object of your sentence before the subject of your sentence. So if you think about a subject as having someone who is doing something and something that doing is happening to, a passive voice sentence is when you have the thing that's having the doing happening to go at the beginning, the object, right? And the subject, the one that's doing the doing, is hidden all the way at the end of the sentence. When you do this, when you write with passive voice, you take the power away from your subjects by putting them at the end of your sentence. So here on the slide, I have an example of a passive voice sentence. The present was opened by Jane. Now, that sentence is really simple. It's pretty easy to understand. It's only a few words. But overall, passive voice is too wordy and confusing for your readers. It can negatively affect readers. But that being said, it's not grammatically incorrect. So for many of us who are just writing in Word or Google Docs or something like that, passive voice is not going to flag because it's grammatically correct. You can use passive voice. It's just important to choose when. And Andrea in the chat, I don't know if this is Andrea Boyd, but if it is, hey, Andrea, was saying that passive voice is really popular in politics because it removes blame from the speaker. And that's exactly correct. Again, passive voice is grammatically correct. You just need to choose when to use it. So those politicians Andrea is talking about, they use passive voice because they want to shift blame. They don't want to have it on themselves. They're using it as a choice. And in that case, it's okay. I mean, we can argue whether or not it's morally okay, but it's okay for them because they want to shift blame. It's doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. But for a lot of us as writers, passive voice is a bad habit. It's a habit that we just fall into, and then we never really think about it again because it's not flagged in Word or Google Docs or anything like that. So we don't think about it. However, when we're not thinking about it, it's creating a negative experience for our readers. So here are the 3 times when I think it's okay to use passive voice, when you can choose to use it. The first is if the subject of your sentence is unknown. So for example, Stonehenge was built around 5,000 years ago. That's okay to use passive voice because we don't know who built it, unless we've discovered recently and I wasn't aware. We don't know who built it. It's fine to use passive voice. There's no subject that we could even put there. You can also use it if the subject is irrelevant. So the time in life building was constructed in 1959. Not the point of that sentence. It's fine to put it with passive voice. You can also make a deliberate choice to use passive voice. So again, Andrea in the chat had an example of politicians often choosing to use passive voice to shift blame. A lot of us will notice that newspaper headlines tend to use passive voice consciously as well. It's really great clickbait, right? So if you see woman murdered in the park or something like that, which is a horrible example, but it happens all the time because those news articles want us to click in and see. They want us to see, oh, you know, what happened to the woman? Who murdered her? I'm a woman living alone. I feel scared. You know, it forces us to click in, right? So they're choosing to use that passive voice to get us to click. Okay, so it's again, arguably not a moral thing to do, but they are choosing it for a linguistic purpose. As writers, we can also choose to create suspicion or create suspense in our writing and use passive voice. So say you are writing a crime novel or a crime romance or something where your protagonist is not sure what's happening. So the example I have is Mary realized a suspicious package had been left on her door. So had been left, we don't know who did that, but Mary doesn't know either, right? So this creates suspense. So in each of these 3 instances, it is okay to use passive voice. And again, I am not saying to cut out all passive voice from our writing. What I am saying is that for many of us as writers, passive voice is a bad habit. It's something we don't think about or realize, and it creates a negative impact for our readers, which we don't even realize because, again, it's not flagged in Word, it's not flagged in Google Docs or anything like that. So we're just like, great, it's here. But again, it creates that wordy, confusing experience. So if you have identified an example of passive voice, the way to fix it is to put the subject back at the beginning of the sentence. So if you remembered that simple sentence we had before, the present was opened by Jane, I can simply fix that sentence by saying Jane opens the present. So Jane opens the present. In this instance, the subject is at the beginning of the sentence. Much simpler and clearer. Again, this sentence is a super simple example, but the more complex and important it is to know your subject, the more difficult it can be. Okay, so here's what you can do if you have passive voice. I would recommend going through your manuscripts or going through a scene and looking for places where you have used the word by. If you have used the word by, this is an instance where you've likely used passive voice. So the word by is a particular kind of signifier of passive voice. You can also look for to be plus verbs. And so for instance, was opened. Both of these are instances of passive voice. If you find those, highly likely the sentence has passive voice. And all you need to do is swap that sentence so that the doer, the subject, comes first. So again, instead of the present was opened by Jane, you have Jane opens the present. Okay, so just look for, if you're doing this yourself, you can look for the word by, you can look for to be plus verbs and put the subject at the beginning to fix that sentence. Now, if you have ProWritingAid, you can fix it simpler than that. So I am showing you for those who are not familiar with the ProWritingAid web editor. So this is what it looks like, and I'll talk more about the ProWritingAid web editor throughout this presentation, but I'll give you a brief tour now. This is what it looks like when you input a document text and you have the goals and the summary report over here, or sorry, the real-time goals and improvements over here on the left. Now, when you have your real-time checker on, you will see a number of different types of suggestions in here, including style suggestions related to passive voice. So you can see right up here, I have an instance of passive voice. I have the high cliffs could be seen by Jane. ProWritingAid easily identifies them and in some cases will suggest a fix so that you can fix it yourself. So in this instance, I can simply click on it, and all of a sudden it fixes that sentence to instead be Jane could see the high cliffs instead of the high cliffs could be seen by Jane. So it makes it really, really simple if you have instances of passive voice to move, again, that subject way back to the beginning. And like I said before, your typical word processor is not going to catch those instances of passive voice because they are grammatically correct. So it's really important to make sure that you have something that can go in there and find it for you so that you're not necessarily going and finding the word by over again. Okay, so that's our first principle. Let's move on to our second, which is my favorite. So our second principle of creating clarity is to reduce glue words. In writing, it's important to prioritize working words over glue words. Hayley, what are working words? Working words are the words that contain a sentence's most essential information. You can't change them or the meaning of the sentence will change. So if we think all the way back to when I said that mini movie sentence, Hayley put on red lipstick. Hayley in that sentence is a working word because I couldn't switch Hayley for Michelle or the meaning of the sentence would change. I couldn't switch Hayley for Andrea or the meaning of the sentence would change. I couldn't switch red lipstick to blush or the meaning of the sentence would change, right? Working words are the most essential information in your sentence, words that you cannot change without changing the meaning of the sentence. Glue words, on the other hand, are all of the other words in your sentence, the words that make the essential pieces of the sentence stick together. You can reduce, remove, or replace them, and the sentence's meaning is not going to significantly change. So for instance, I said Hayley went into her kitchen or Hayley went to her kitchen. It's not going to significantly change the meaning of the sentence. Those words are glue words. Again, they make the sentence stick together. They perform an essential part of making the sentence make sense. However, you can reduce, remove, or replace them and still retain the main meaning of the sentence. Somebody in the chat asked, are they prepositional phrases? A lot of glue words are prepositions, words like articles as well. It'll really depend on kind of what your specific sentence is, but prepositions, articles, conjunctions, all of those are great examples of glue words. Now, if you have too many of those, your sentence is going to be what we at ProWritingAid call sticky. A sticky sentence, again, is not a sentence that is incorrect. However, it is a sentence that is going to be wordy and confusing for your readers. So let's look at an example of a sticky sentence. Marion walked over into the backyard of the school in order to see if there was a new bicycle that she could ride on her date. I guess she didn't want to go to the bike shop. She just wanted to see if there was a free one in the school. I wanted you to tell me in the chat, what are the working words in this sentence? Again, working words are the words that we cannot change without changing the meaning of the sentence. So I'll give you a few seconds. What words are our working words? Put them in the chat and we'll see if they match up to what I have. Okay, I see a bicycle. I see Marion, date, school, backyard bicycle, walked, etc. Okay, so I see a couple folks putting words like to and that. Those are our glue words. So right now, again, we're working for our working words, which are the words we cannot change without changing the meaning of the sentence. Okay, seeing a lot of Marion, backyard, bicycle, school, etc. Okay, perfect. These are exactly what I had as well. So Marion walked into the backyard, school, new bicycle, ride, and date. So if I changed Marion to Hayley, the meaning of the sentence would change. If I changed walked to hopped, the sentence would change. If I changed school to bicycle, the sentence would change. If I changed bicycle to roller skates, the sentence would change, etc. If I changed ride or if I changed date to field trip, the sentence would change, right? All of these words that I have highlighted are our working words. They are essential for making the sentence make sense, and they are essential to understanding the meaning of the sentence. We cannot shift them. That means that every other word in this sentence is a glue word. We can reduce, remove, or replace those words, and the sentence will still make sense. Now, if you have a sentence that has too many glue words, like the sentence that we just said, there is not one way to fix it. You can reduce, remove, or replace by rewriting that sentence to make it shorter and clearer and cut out some of those glue words. So let's all try to do that. I'm going to give us a couple minutes to try to fix this sentence, removing some of those glue words. So again, we said here, there's a lot of glue words in this sentence. There's a lot of things making the sentence too long and too confusing. What I would like you to do is in the chat, try to rewrite this sentence. You can rewrite the full sentence or just parts of it, and then we'll see how close you get to mine. And we'll also just see all of our different examples that come in. I'll give you a couple seconds to put them in the chats. Okay, so I have Marion walk to the school's backyard to find a bicycle to ride on her date. Marion walked into the school's backyard to find a bicycle she could ride. Marion walked to the school's backyard. Marion walked into the schoolyard. Okay, great. So we have so many different examples here. Somebody even put a question. Marion walked into the school's backyard. Was there a bicycle she could use for her date? Amazing. Awesome. These examples are so great. They're all so much clearer and so much more concise. Here's what I had. Marion checked the school's backyard for a new bicycle to ride on her date. Oh, it looks like somebody got pretty close to me. Either way, all of these versions are correct, right? All of these versions are correct because we each have a different version of a sentence that retains the same meaning, that our protagonist, Marion, goes to the schoolyard to find a new bicycle for her date. Each and every single one of these versions is more effective than the first one because it's cutting out a lot of those glue words. So they're shorter, more concise, and more clear. Now, this is really important because a lot of times when I talk about, again, editing and being clear, people are often really worried that when they edit, their work is going to sound very similar to someone else's or something like that. Sticky sentences, I think, are a perfect example of how when you edit, you do not always have to have the same final sentence in mind, right? We just had dozens and dozens of different examples of final sentences, and all of them were correct and all of them were better. So I really want everyone to feel empowered when you go back to checking your writing to make sure that you are writing sentences in a way that retains your authorial voice. So you can decide if you want to, keep the verb looked or switch to checked, right? You as the author have that choice. However, what you should be doing is thinking, where do I have ineffective sentences and how can I make them more effective by reducing, removing, or replacing some of those sticky words? So what are you going to do to find this if you don't have ProWritingAid? So first, I would recommend looking for overly long sentences. Overly long is subjective. It's going to change depending on what you're writing and your genre. But for romance, I would say that anything over 18 words long is probably too long. It's a good indication that your sentence might be sticky. It might just need to be split up or anything like that. But that's a good place to start, is if your sentence is overly long. You can also look for sentences that have a lot of glue words, so prepositions, conjunctions, articles, like we talked about. And then there's not one specific way to remove those. There's not one specific way to fix it, but what you can do is look at that sentence, decide what you want to take out, what you want to reduce, remove, or replace to make the sentence more effective. Or you can decide to keep it. You might decide to keep the sentence being a little bit long or confusing. For instance, if you are writing dialogue and you are writing how someone talks in a very manner, or you've decided that you just want this sentence to be a little bit longer and a little bit wordier, totally fine. But again, the goal is to make sure that you are choosing this as the writer, that it's not something that's happening to you. I think a lot of us as writers spend so much time thinking about our characters, our setting, our plot points, etc., that when it comes down to our actual language, we don't kind of make conscious choices about our words and our sentence structure as much as we can. So again, same thing with passive voice, same thing with sticky sentences. You do not always need to change this. But what I am recommending is looking for these flags, which can make your writing feel confusing or unclear to your reader, and then deciding whether or not you want to change those. Now, if you have ProWritingAid, you can make these changes much more simply because ProWritingAid has a sticky sentences report. So in your goals toolbar, which is here on the left-hand side, one of the reports that you will see is the glue index report. Now, ProWritingAid recommends that your overall document has about 40% glue words and 60% working words. So the emphasis is on those important words that we cannot change without changing the meaning of the sentence. So if you are outside of that range, you will see here, this document has about 46% glue words. We're a little outside of the range that ProWritingAid recommends. So what I can do is click on the glue index report and come in to see which specific sentences are sticky. Now, ProWritingAid breaks down your sentences into sticky, semi-sticky, and just fine. A sticky sentence is something that has above 60% glue words. Those are sentences I would definitely recommend looking at, because if you have over 60% glue words, your sentence is probably going to be really meandering and long. And unless it's in dialogue or point of view, you'll likely want to change it. Semi-sticky, on the other hand, is between 40 and 60. So these are places where you might want to make some changes, but if it's only at like 46% or it's at 48%, you might say, you know what, I'm fine with the sentence as it is. We break it into those two categories. So again, you can see where you should be spending your time versus, where you might be like, you know what, I'm close enough to 40, it's okay. And then you'll also in this check see the overall glue index, again, that 46.2, which we saw before, as well as the target, which is 40. So you'll see I'm a little over 40%. So maybe I want to adjust some of these sentences. Now, if you have a semi-sticky sentence like the ones highlighted here, you can hover over it and ProWritingAid will tell you exactly what those glue words are, so you know what you can reduce, remove, or replace when you're rewriting the sentence. You'll notice that in this report, there is not a suggestion for how to rewrite it like there was for that passive voice suggestion I saw before. That is because, like I said before, there's not one way to fix these sentences, right? Fixing these sentences will depend on your goal as an author, how you want to fix it. There's many different options. So we do the work of identifying the problematic sentences for you, giving you the glue words, and then you can decide how to reduce, remove, or replace based on your choices. Again, if this sticky sentence, you come here and see that it's, within a dialogue or within a point of view, that's fine. You might decide, you know what, I don't care about the sticky sentences because this is clear to how this character speaks. If it's outside of dialogue, if it's in description or action or something like that, you might decide, yes, I do care about how the sentence is set up and I need to make it more clear for my reader. It's giving you that information that as writers, we're often missing and we're often not able to get. It's giving you all of that kind of insight into what are my sentences actually set up like, because a lot of times we just think, it's okay. And we won't necessarily know that it's potentially negatively impacting our readers when it's grammatically correct and when we're not seeing it as well. Okay. So our third principle is to use powerful verbs. So we talked about subjects, we talked about sticky sentences. Now let's go into verbs. Verbs are the engines of our writing. They are what power our writing forward. They were what give action to our characters, actions to our stories. And unfortunately, a lot of times writers use weak verbs. They will either hide the verb or they will use adverbs to make the verb stronger. So what do I mean when I'm talking about hiding a verb? A hidden verb is also known as a nominalization. This is when you take a verb, a strong word, and you hide it behind a weaker verb. So here, the phrase that I have highlighted, make an announcement, the actual kind of strong verb in here is announce. However, I have hidden that strong verb behind this weaker verb, make an announcement. Again, this is not incorrect. The sentence is correct. It's not going to flag or anything like that. But we've taken our powerful word announce and we've taken some of the power out of that, hiding it behind this weaker verb, which is a less powerful sentence structure and wordier than we need it to be. So this is one mistake that authors often make with using verbs. Writers will also use words like very or use verbs that need very or adverbs to make them more effective. So, instead of saying I dashed towards the train, you would say I ran quickly, right? You're adding in this adverb to modify a weaker verb when you could have a stronger verb in its place. So both of these things, hidden verbs and weak verbs, are bad habits that a lot of us as writers have that we don't necessarily recognize in our own word. I see a lot of people saying that they feel attacked in the chat. Yes, it's a really bad habit. And again, it's not grammatically incorrect. So it's making our words, just making our verbs less effective and making our sentences less strong. We should all be focusing on letting our verbs power our writing, right? We don't need to have these adverbs. We don't need to have the verb becoming a noun in a nominalization. We need to let our verbs power our writing. So you should make sure that you are showing the verb. So if you have instances where you have a nominalization, where again, you've turned that verb announce into a noun announcement, try to remove that nominalization. So instead of we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday, we will announce the winner on Friday. Powerful, shorter, to the point. Now, again, make an announcement is not incorrect, so you might choose to use it. Perhaps you have a character who's very nervous or a character who's very formal. Those characters might have nominalizations. They might speak in a little bit more hedged language. However, if your character is straight and to the point, they're probably not going to use a nominalization because they are going to be straight to the point. They're going to use stronger verb language. So you want to think about that. You also should try to remove adverbs and remove words like very or turning your weaker verbs into adverbs, turning your weaker words modifying your weaker verbs with adverbs and just use strong verbs that say what you mean. So instead of ran quickly, you would say dashed. It's shorter and it's a more effective, more vivid verb that's going to make your writing more effective. So when fixing this on your own, I would look for places where you have that phrase, that nominalization phrase, where you have taken a verb, make an announcement, made a decision, anytime where you've taken the actual strong verb and made that into a noun, and then you'll just take that noun and pop it right back into the verb. And then also places where you have used adverbs, you can, again, remove that adverbial phrase and choose a stronger verb in its place. Now, there are obviously ways to fix this with ProWritingAid as well. So if we go back to our real-time checker, you will see places where we can find some adverbs. So here we have some adverbs. This is showing a place where we're missing a comma, but we will also find places where we are using incorrect verbs. We can do it in ProWritingAid with dialogue tags with adverbs. So for instance, here we have explained, exclaimed, exasperatedly. In this instance, we have used adverbs to make our writing less effective. We will also have places where there can be stronger verbs. Let me see if I have one in this sentence. Oh, so here, very big. Right here, this is actually an adjective, not a verb, but I've used an adjective in this instance when I could use a stronger, or excuse me, I've used an adverb with a weak adjective in a place where I could use a stronger adjective instead. Very similar to what you can do with verbs as well, right? So either of those instances, ProWritingAid will help you find places where you have used nominalizations, where you have used adverbs, and it'll help you identify and fix those easily to make the words more effective. All right, moving on to our fourth principle. So our fourth principle of clarity is to target correct readability. Audiences typically prefer works that are easy to read. Now, this is shocking for a lot of us as writers. A lot of us as writers, particularly if we're writing in romance or if we're writing erotica or something that's for an adult audience, we think, okay, it's adult works, that means we have to write it at a level that adults, like at an adult level, a college level or something like that. That cannot be further from the truth. Audiences prefer works that are easy to read. Readers across the world typically prefer their fiction writing to be easier than the level they can actually read at. So most readers prefer their works of fiction, particularly in romance writing, to be written at about 7th to 8th grade level. That means that the prose included in that writing is something that a 7th or 8th grader could understand. However, it has nothing to do with the ideas that are contained. It only has to do with how the sentences are set up. So let's talk about what that means. So to make your work more readable, you need to prioritize 3 things. First, you need to make sure that your ideas are the stars. When audiences are reading fiction works, they typically do not want to have a thesaurus next to them opening it up to see what every single word means, right? In some instances, they might if you're writing a specific type of fiction. But for romance novels, most people are not going to want to have to go to their dictionary or find it anytime they're looking up a word. They're wanting to get lost in the story itself. They want to, just like Christina's saying in the chat, get into the steaminess of this romance novel. They do not necessarily want to be like, okay, hold on, let me go grab my dictionary and figure what this means, okay? So our readers will often want our ideas to be the key piece here. When you're making your work readable, you also need to make sure that you are choosing your words carefully. So, as I said, most readers do not want to have to sit with a dictionary right next to them. However, you will probably want to include some words some more difficult words that your audience might not understand to add information to your story. So let me give you an example. I don't know if any of you have recently read The Love Hypothesis, which is a new romance book that just came out. It's really great. But the main characters in The Love Hypothesis are PhD scientists. So there's a lot of sciencey jargon within the book, but it makes sense because that's who those characters are. It's not everything in the book, but it's kind of interspersed in there enough to make the characters believable. In that instance, it's okay to use those more interesting words because it's doing something for the characters, right? It's explaining who the characters are. It's making them believable. It's setting up their world. That's okay. The author is choosing them carefully. So she's choosing to use those words in those specific scientific settings for a purpose. When she's writing a steamy scene, she is not choosing very, very difficult words because it's not important to have difficult, complex terms when she's writing this steamy love scene, right? So she's choosing to use them carefully. That's the same thing that we need to think about when we're approaching word choice for our own readability. We need to make sure that we are using our work using difficult words when they matter and not in every single sentence. If you're doing it in every single sentence, it's going to be effective than when it's important. Now, it's also important to think that audience matters. Every single audience is different, and you should consider yours when targeting readability. So for those of us who write in different facets of our life, if we write in business versus if we write in, in fiction, we're going to target different readability for each of those times. So sometimes we might be targeting 7th grade readability if we are writing fiction. Sometimes we might be targeting 12th grade readability if we are writing academic papers for work, or we might be targeting above if you're in a postgraduate program. Readability is not a fixed scale. Readability depends specifically on who you are writing for and what they can understand. Now, before we go into what readability doesn't mean, I've seen a number of people in the chat asking about what the ideal grade is. Again, 7th to 8th grade is the higher end of what your readability should be. If you're below that for romance, it's not actually going to be a problem. If you're below that, it's likely going to be even more effective for your audiences as well. So if you're at 5th grade or something like that, I would not sweat it. Don't worry about it. Your audience is not going to be like, this is too easy. What they are going to do is be able to access your work really effectively. So I'm going to, Claire, in just a second, define target readability. So don't worry, we're getting to that. But overall, when you're targeting readability, you need to be thinking about who your audience is. So again, writing romance, you're going to target a different readability than if you're writing a business report. It's going to depend on who your audience is and what they understand. So when I go into readability, what I do not mean is that your prose is boring or that your writing is dumbed down. So just like I said, Allie, who wrote the love hypothesis, chooses to use unique words and structures. She's just doing it consciously. Every sentence is not really difficult. It's only the sentences that are giving information about the characters and they're like pipettes in the lab, right? She's using those words when she's setting the scene and giving characterization. She's not using them when it comes to their coffee dates or when it comes to the steamier love scene she writes. It's totally different depending on what the scenario is. So she's using them when it counts, not using them throughout her story. Readability, having a readability at 7th or 5th grade or anything like that also does not mean that your writing is dumbed down or is too easy or anything like that. Complicated ideas deserve clear language. If you have something really, really important that you need to get across, it's very important to make sure your work is as readable as possible to do that effectively. So somebody in the chat had just asked, I think it was Claire, about targeted readability. So targeted readability relates to something known as a readability score. A readability score is a prediction of who will be able to read your writing. There are many types of readability scores. Some common ones are Dale Shaw, Gunning Fogg, the Flesch formulas, which maybe a lot of Americans are familiar with because that's what we do for a lot of our grade level work. Basically, all of those formulas analyze your text. They look at things like word choice, sentence length, etc., and they calculate what grade level of student would be able to understand that text. So they'll analyze your document, they'll look at a number of different pieces, and they'll say, okay, I predict that a 7th grader will be able to understand this text, or I believe that a 12th grader would be able to understand this text, or a 3rd grader, or whatever it is. Again, for romance novels, we typically want our romance novels to have a readability score of 7th grade or below to be the most accessible and enjoyable for our audience. That does not mean that most of our readers will be 12 or 13-year-olds. Hopefully they will not, but those will be, that's kind of the enjoyable, accessible reading score for most of our audiences. So what to do if your score is so high? So say you find a readability calculator online. There are tons of free ones. There are also ones in Microsoft Word. I used to use the one in Microsoft Word all the time when I was a student. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to target a 12th grade readability. That means I'm smart, which again, as we've just established, is not the case. You can have really strong, effective writing with a much lower readability score. You can find free readability calculators all over the internet. And if you run your work through one and find that your score is too high, there are a few things you can do. First, easier vocabulary. That is a key one. Being able to remove easier vocabulary can make your writing more effective. You can also shorten your sentences. Long sentences are more challenging for readers, so they will make your sentences more, or they will make your readability score higher. So just like we talked about glue words, which shorten our sentences, if you find sticky sentences, that will likely bring your writing back down into a readability score that you're looking for. You can also remove jargon, cliches, terms that specific groups of readers might not understand. Again, this is depending on what you're writing. So in a romance novel, you probably don't want to use a lot of jargon. A business document, you might want to use a lot of jargon. It'll just depend on your context. Again, remember, readability is not fixed. It's dependent on who and what you're writing. And then you can also use active voice. So passive voice is something that makes your writing much longer, much more complicated, much more confusing. And then again, it will also boost your readability score and, potentially move you out of the target audience. So again, as I mentioned, there are free readability calculators all over online that you can use. You can also, of course, use ProWritingAids. So ProWritingAid has a number of different places where you can see readability. So you'll see here that I have at the top, which I haven't showed y'all yet, that my document type here is romance. Now, as you shift your document type, so say, this is obviously fiction, but if I change this to compare or contrast essay, the goals that I have over here change. So you'll see that now this is in a readability grade that's in something appropriate for an essay. Whereas if I move it down to romance, because it's a different type of document, it's outside. Where did readability go? Where did it go? Oh no, I'm blind. Here it is. Okay. So if you are moving it out of the range for a romance article, for a romance document, it's now outside of the target audience, or the target score, because again, different document types will have different scores or different target scores that they're looking for. So that's one of the ways that the goals panel will help you identify for your specific document type what your readability grade should be. Now, there are also so many different ways that you can improve readability within your document itself too. So like we've looked at before, there are places to fix passive voice. You can also find examples like this. So places where you have been too wordy. So something like began to climb, you can move it simply to climbed. That will improve your readability. You can also come here and run our readability report, which is up here. And that report will identify which specific paragraphs are difficult to read, slightly difficult to read, or easy. So if you want to focus paragraph by paragraph, you can also and laser in on which parts are easier versus which parts are more difficult. So there's a ton of different improvements that can be made to make your writing more readable, both from your real-time report with the style suggestions, as well as within the readability report as well. Okay, our fifth and final principle, and then we will get to some questions. So we've talked throughout this presentation about cutting things, about making things more simple, and I promised at the beginning that we would get to a section where we talked about choosing specific vivid words, and we are here. So readability and clarity is not all about just cutting, choosing simpler words all the time. We also need to be as specific as possible. Vague words and vague sentences are going to lack the specificity that our readers need. So here's a sentence, and I want you to tell me in the chat, what do you picture when I say this? After her boyfriend dumped her, Kate made some improvements to her cabin. So what are you picturing that Kate is doing here and you can tell me in the chat. Okay, so someone remodeled. Isabel threw his stuff out. Somebody's cleaning, painting, new curtains, interior design, cleaning, throw pillows. Yeah, tons of different things here, right? The fact that we have like 50 or 60 different options of what people are doing is an exact example of why we need to have something be more specific, because we have no idea what Kate has done. Scarlett says he's cleaning up a body, right? So we've gone everywhere from like cleaning up a body to, installing curtains, right? There are so many different ways that we can make the sentence more effective for our readers, so they simply have no idea. It could be absolutely anything, as someone just said in the chat. When our sentences are this vague, it is not effective for our readers. They have no idea what's happening. So what we should do is make our sentence more specific. So here, when I say Kate replaced the bathroom suite, repainted the living room, and laid hardwood floors, we have a much more specific idea of exactly what's happening, right? Now we can close our eyes, and that mini movie that each of us are playing is going to be much more effective than the mini movie where like Scarlett has her dragging a body out and someone else has it putting in new windows, right? When we are more specific, we're giving that accurate mini movie to our readers. So we've talked all about how we can make that mini movie as clear as possible. Now we also need to make sure that that mini movie is as accurate as possible. So it needs to be both clear and specific, okay? So both clear and specific is going to make our sentences as effective as possible. I also want to highlight before we go into questions that clarity does not always equal brevity. Okay, so our second sentence here is longer than our first. However, our first has a higher glue word percentage, right? Like a lot of these words we can reduce, remove, or replace. Here, we have fewer glue words, right? We can't say, we can't change bathroom suite to kitchen suite because the sentence would change. We can't change living room to dining room because the sentence would change, right? So when you're thinking about adding more words back in, going back to that concept of working words can help you think, am I being specific and am I adding something that has meaning for my sentence, right? So if the words in your sentence are working words, if they are clear and simple, it's likely that you're adding something to your reader, not taking away. Again, this is not for every single sentence. There's always going to be nuance, but it is important to be thinking through, how can I make my writing more effective to make sure that, again, I am like giving as much information as possible so that that movie that my reader is playing in their head is as accurate as possible. Okay, so what you need to ask yourself is the movie a reader playing in their head accurate to what I'm trying to show? Would somebody think that making some improvements means removing a body, right? That is not the accurate movie I wanted to put in there. So you need to ask yourself, would that description be accurate to what I'm trying to show? Now, again, as always, we can also fix this with ProWritingAid. So we have a number of different reports that can help you with this, including the diction report, which specifically highlights vague and abstract words that you can make more effective. And then I also use the dialogue check for this as well, because you can find places where you have done a little bit more showing a little bit more telling as opposed to showing. Oftentimes, if you are telling or if you have too many emotion tells, which we have here, that might be an instance where you're not giving enough credence to that movie that the reader is trying to play. Okay. So what you need to be thinking about is, am I creating a movie that a reader could vividly picture and picture correctly? Okay. Okay. So today we have covered why clarity is the most important goal for all writers. We have also talked about 5 key principles that are going to make your writing more clear. And we have told you how to apply those principles to your writing to make it more effective. So we have covered a ton today, and we have another session after this. So I'm going to get through as many questions as I possibly can, but then I will also be in the Facebook group to answer anything specifically that you have. So let me just go ahead and check into our questions. Oh, and before I get to that, I saw a couple of people in the chat were asking what is too descriptive. I know they're coming for me. They're like, stop talking about clarity. We need to wrap up. Everyone's tired. But some people in the chat asked about what is too descriptive. So Amy, first of all, I just want to say, Amy, I saw things that you were saying in the chat, and I just want to encourage you that this is stuff that everybody needs to learn. And it's stuff that all of us as writers often struggle with, and it's not something that is very intuitive. And that's one of the reasons why I cover this today, because all of these are mistakes that every single writer makes. And it's also not something that's even possible to fix on the first time around. That's why we have editing stages. That's why you have live editors. That's why you have tools like ProWritingAid, because these things are not intuitive. You're not supposed to just know how. Nobody, I think, just knows how to do this. Even the best writers in the world have to go back through the writing to make it more effective. So I just want to encourage, for anyone who's feeling like, oh my gosh, this is so much or anything like that, do not feel bad about this. I use ProWritingAid. I teach how to use ProWritingAid for my job, but I also, and I write every day. I've written probably thousands of blog posts and multiple books. And each time I use ProWritingAid, and each time I find that I'm guilty of using these clarity presentation or these clarity principles, right? I have to apply them. So it's not something you're expected to know. That's why we're covering them. So it's definitely something that you are going to have to keep practicing, and it is totally okay to keep practicing them and to keep practicing them for a long time. Okay, so let me go to some of the questions. Okay, so some people asked about what percentage we should aim for glue words. Again, yes, 40% or that being said, it's not the end of the world if you're at 43 or if you're at 46. I would start to look a little bit more carefully if you're at like 50 to 60% or higher. If you're under that, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Somebody asked if your characters speak a certain way and you're writing in deep point of view voice, is there an exception to clarity and using glue words? Of course. Again, dialogue and point of view are huge places where you might want to ignore suggestions related to glue words, suggestions related to readability. It might be a place where you start to speak in a dialect versus in, more standardized English, anything like that. Totally okay to remove things with dialogue. ProWritingAid does have some specific ways in your settings. If you come in here, I went settings and then app settings. There are places where you can ignore specific things in dialogue. So you can ignore cliches, redundancies, vague words, and dictionary errors in dialogue. You can turn these on to make it so that, some of those things, again, within dialogue are okay to ignore. And again, one of the reasons that I focused on these particular principles is because none of them are incorrect. You could have every single one of these principles still in your writing and it would be fine. Like it's not going to flag in Word. It's not going to flag in Google Docs. Every sentence is going to be grammatically correct. However, what you need to do is think, again, consciously. My biggest thing is I want us to make sure that writing is not just something that happens to us that we feel really overwhelmed by, but that we're back and we're thinking about our writing critically and we're thinking about what edits that we should make. We're doing so with some type of frame of reference, right? Because otherwise it's just overwhelming to look at it. So when you go back and you think, okay, maybe I'll take a look at passive voice. Some of these instances, I might want to keep it. Some of these times it's fine. You might also want to say, some of these times I want to keep these glue words. Some of these times I don't, right? Again, I am not by any means saying that you always have to apply every single one of these principles, but this is a framework to keep in mind when editing to make, again, your specific sentences, your mini movies more effective. Okay, yes, Juanita, ProWritingAid does look for nominalization. Annalise has a great question about which point in the self-editing process, and I think this will unfortunately have to be my last question. I will jump into the Facebook group right after this to get any more additional questions that anyone has. So when you're self-editing, you can use ProWritingAid or use any type of tool at any point with your specific process. Here's how this works for me. I use ProWritingAid's Chrome extension when I'm writing pretty much anything. So for work. So, when I'm writing a blog for ProWritingAid, when I'm writing an email, when I'm writing this presentation, I will use ProWritingAid as I'm doing it. It'll give me corrections in real time. And that is because I am not that precious about that work. I can take the criticism. I can take the things lighting up. However, when I am writing fiction, I am very nervous. And when I am writing fiction, I am very, very sensitive. And so seeing all of the underlines is hard for me when I'm writing fiction. So I don't turn ProWritingAid on until after I finished a particular chapter and I'm ready to come back and edit it. I have to be in an editing mindset. So you can use this at any point in your self-editing process. Like you can use it while you're writing, you can come back to it later. It just is going to depend on, what is most effective for you and, what your particular writing process is. I will say that my session, so on Friday, I'm going to do a session for all the ProWritingAid Premium members. I will talk specifically about the 3 phases of editing. So developmental, copy editing, which is what I talked about today, and then proofreading, which isn't really editing, but we'll get into that on Friday. Anyway, so at that one, I'll talk more specifically about each stage of self-editing and kind of what you should do at each stage. But just know that this, in terms of using ProWritingAid, you can use this either during your writing if you're writing something shorter, or you can use it a little bit more later in the editing process if you're writing something longer. Okay, so as I said, I think that's the last question that I have time for before our next session. For those of you who have asked, Michelle is going to drop, again, the links to ProWritingAid. I will be doing another session on Friday all about editing. And if you are interested in getting ProWritingAid Premium, this is a great deal, 40%. We would love to have you come in on Friday and just have you use the tool. And for anyone who's interested, I deliver sessions like this all the time for ProWritingAid Academy, which I'll talk more about on Friday, but that is also there as well. Thank you all so much. I will see you in the Facebook group. I will start a thread just after this. And then for those of you who are still sticking around, I will be interviewing Camille Perry at 6 p.m. So in just less than an hour, and I will see you all there. Have a great day for those of you who are signed off for the night. Bye, everybody.